that hurt. But that's a choice that we make, and the same thing when we talk to others. If they reject it, we're to dust off our feet and move on.
Yeah.
And there are good hearts out there, and they're willing to change. You just have to be persistent in doing God's work.
And when we talk about the ability to choose, and I think that's a testament to how much God loves us. We've all had people that we love in our lives that have walked out of our lives and made that choice. Can you imagine having control over them to change their hearts and having that power like God does? But imagine how much love it would take to allow them to make that choice, to allow them to choose and not create a robot that is infatuated by them. I just think that would take a tremendous amount of love to hold back that power. Anyways, yeah.
Trust the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. All your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. Right?
Good. Yeah.
I think of coveting and adultery.
Yeah.
They looked around at the other nations and said they liked that better than worshiping and being under God's direction.
Yeah, that's exactly it right there, too. They say, I'll set a king over me. This is what the nation of Israel, Moses says, is going to say. Like all the nations that are around me. How often do we make decisions based off of what everybody else is doing? Yeah. Yeah, Martin.
Just help me out in my line of thinking, and I don't know the answer, that's the reason I'm asking, is didn't God set up some type of rule of authority when He started up the earth? In other words, He just wasn't, was it He's supposed to be the only authority to follow? Didn't He set up government?
Oh yeah, well it was Adam and Eve dwelling in the garden with a perfect relationship with God. Yeah, they listened to God. And at the time, the one rule they have is don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right?
But when did God authorize governments and some type of authority?
Well, I mean, you're seeing it right here.
God, and this is for the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm.
See, the other people were Gentiles, so I'm just trying to figure that out.
Yeah, well, I think it was something that's naturally going to happen. It would have taken place after, the Tower of Babel, or perhaps before the flood. But we don't necessarily read anything where God says, okay, now you can go out and start a monarchy or whatever. This is just something that, for whatever reason, people did. Because I think that we have a natural instinct to look for a leader. You know what I mean? And from the beginning, God wants to be that leader. But from the beginning, man has been trying something else, something we can look at so often is what it is. We want something we can look at. Yeah. Anybody else? Josiah? You look like you had a hand raised just a second ago.
No, that's exactly it. We have that when we reject God, we become gods to ourselves. Mm-hmm. And we see here that they reject God as their king. And as you pointed to in Judges, they were without a king at that time.
Yeah.
And instead of giving them over to captivity to be saved again, basically it's, okay, fine, you want to reject me, you can have your own king, and you're going to have to live with the consequences.
And I always thought that was interesting because we read these statements, and to me it's clear too when you look at Deuteronomy. We also looked at Hosea 13:11 where he says, "I gave you a king in my anger." And when we read 1 Samuel 8 when he's saying they've rejected me as king, we understand that God was supposed to be the king, and it wasn't his ideal to have man sit on his throne on earth. But in Israel, and everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And that's interesting to me because Judges acknowledges this need for leadership in Israel. But I don't think it was simply because they lacked a physical throne. It was because they failed to acknowledge God as their king, and they did it for hundreds of years. And now we're seeing it's culminating effect in 1 Samuel 8, right? Yeah, what are you going to say, JC?
Well, I wonder what it is in humans that we look at only what we want to see. Like they look around and they saw that what they thought were the good things about all these nations around them that had kings. Look, that one's rich, that one's powerful, they have a great army. They looked at all these things, whereas here they were just this wandering group of kingless people, and things didn't feel all that great. But we've done that ever since then as well.
Yeah.
We today have a ton of people who look at other countries and go, well, look, they have free healthcare, they have it, and we never look at but look at what they give up for that. Mm-hmm. And so they didn't do that then. They didn't look and say, well, yeah, they have a great army, but look at what they have bad about them as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest mistakes in our thinking that we do, I think it's a mistake we see Israel make as well, is they looked around perhaps at other successful nations and they said, have kings, that's what makes them successful. Rather than attributing success to God. Right? I mean, how foolish, what kind of thinking is that? To say, oh, well, they have a king, that's going to make us a successful nation, a nation to be reckoned with. Israel was really in this, yeah, Brett, sorry.
Well, what was wanted when they rejected him is what God through Peter says that we are with the new kingdom and what Jesus established. We are today, he said in 1 Peter 2, you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood of people for his possession.
Yep.
It was to be a nation of priests, not a nation with a king.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because before what you have with Moses, really, and we're going to see this too, we'll go over it, but during the days of Moses and during the days of Judges, up until you have a king, you have a nation where it's operating as everybody is serving God. But now you throw a king into it, and now you got to almost delegate your priorities between serving a king and serving God. Well, that's going to create a problem right away, right? We're going to see him struggle with that. I was just thinking something that I want. Yes, one of the, I guess, mental traps that, and I think I already mentioned this, but again, just attributing success to ourselves rather than attributing success to God. We need to recognize that it is God that will ultimately make us successful, and we can follow examples of success, and that'll help, but we always have to look to God for those blessings. Okay. I was thinking something else too, but I can't remember what it was. That's what it was. When you think about Israel, they were really in a position to be unique, weren't they? Why do I say that? God is their king, right? They're unlike all the other nations at this point. And can you imagine how much glory that would have brought to God? Up to this point, it already was bringing glory to God. Here you have a nation of people that's thriving. Obviously, in the period of Judges, it's up and down. But when they're doing what's right, they're thriving, and they don't even have a king. And now all of a sudden, Gary, what are you saying?
And they have one God, not
one God, not multiple gods, and also their gods are asking them to sacrifice, or Israel's God isn't asking to sacrifice children, right? As we read about the disgusting things that idolatry brought about in certain nations, and here's a God that is leading Israel and is causing them to be a light to the world. Is really what it is. There's better laws and everything. Absolutely. But the application I want to make from this is that God's people, we got to be different. We must be different.
Manasseh did more evil than all the nations that were cast out.
Yeah.
So God had to do them in and send them into captivity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you think about Israel, God led them out of Egypt. At one point, we could say that they were walking in darkness, couldn't we? We all walked in darkness. Ephesians chapter 5:8 actually doesn't, the wording doesn't say we walked in darkness, but it says of those who were sons of disobedience, it says this right afterwards, that for at one time you were darkness. It's not simply that we walked in darkness, but that's what we were. That's what characterized us, was darkness. And so it's so important for us to be different because all of a sudden then Christ comes, right? And John chapter 1, verse 4 and 5, when it's talking about Jesus Christ as the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So we were darkness. Now all of a sudden Christ, the Son of God, is introduced to the world, and in him was the light and life of men. And all of us experience and have that light and life when we come to him and we obey the gospel. And so we recognize that he is different. We're darkness, Ephesians 5:8 says. But of God, in 1 John 1:5, it says, God is light. In him there is no darkness at all. I mean, imagine that. Somebody who has no moral corruption whatsoever. In him, he's completely light. He's completely good. Our God is different. And so, if he's different, then his followers have to be different as well, don't they? 1 John chapter 1, verse 6 goes on to say, if we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. But if we walk in light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. That's God. We have fellowship with God, and God has fellowship with us. And the blood of Jesus, his Son, cleanses us from all sin. We recognize that God is different, therefore that logically follows that we should be different as well. And this is an opportunity that we don't want to blow, like Israel did. They had this opportunity to be unique. They had an opportunity to be different. To be different like their God was different compared to all those false gods. And so when we realize that, it should spark us to abandon our former lives and walk as children of light. The second part of Ephesians chapter 5, at first in Ephesians 5:8, says, "For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the world. Walk as children of light." That's what the gospel of Christ should do. It should cause a change in our lives when we recognize how different Jesus Christ is. That he's not just calling you to a different way of life, he's calling you to a higher morality that even changes the way you think. What your heart wants. It's different. He says, "I am the way, the truth, the life." How different is that today in a relativistic society? Whoa, Jesus Christ, there's truth. There's something that I can follow and gives structure to my life, something I can count on. But it doesn't just end there. As Christ is an example to us and causes us to come to the light and to glorify God, we're supposed to emulate that through the lives that we live. Matthew chapter 5, verse 16 says, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." We're supposed to be different. This is how it works. And when we live different lives as God is different, contrary to the world, that, for honest hearts, as you were talking about, David, is going to cause other people to say, you know what, there's something about the way that they live that I like. There's something about the world that I don't like, and I don't know what it is, but I want to learn. That's how it works. Clint, you were going to raise your hand? No, just kind of twitching. All right, cool.
I just agree.
All right. Yeah, Brian.
One other thought, and I was kind of still mulling over what Marvin brought up a minute ago, but we see Jesus came as a servant. And in Luke 22, he actually addresses the disciples because they're arguing over who's going to be greatest, who's going to have the most authority. Yeah. And Jesus says, he actually used the example of Gentiles. He says, "Consider the kings of the Gentiles, how they lord it over them." They lord over the people. And they make them sit at their feet and serve them. And Jesus says, "What am I? I am a servant." Generally the master sits at the table and the servant serves him. He says, "I'm serving you." And so it's a completely different upside down relationship than what we see in the world of people having authority.
Yeah.
And Jesus used the Gentiles as examples, as the Gentile kings. They lorded over the people.
Yeah.
I came as a servant.
And what's crazy about that is, we read about in Philippians chapter 2, he humbled himself, right? He chose to humble himself and take the form of a man. He chose to be humble. Which is crazy because did anybody ever walk the earth except for Jesus who had the right to not be humble? Is there any one of us that would say, you know what, Jesus, you gotta get off your high horse? No, none of us would ever say that. Jesus chose to be humble, even though he didn't have to make that choice, and he came as a servant, as Brian said. That's different. That's different than all the kings that we're going to read about. I mean, we see great kings. We read about David. David was a great king, but he messed up, and he served himself at times. Right, with Bathsheba and the census. Jesus, he came to serve. That in and of itself is incredible. Yeah, David.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest differences that just illuminates itself, if you will, is the difference between the kings and, of course, Jesus Christ is the fact that Jesus led by example. Many of the kings led by their own example. They always had this tendency to draw upon what they wanted rather than what God wanted. Jesus was always focused, and he always led by example. He showed you what you must do.
Yeah. Yep.
And he lived it.
Not to be done through selfish ambition, and in everything you need your brother and your sister equal, greater to your own. And it goes on to say that he become poor that we might become rich. That's in Philippians 2.
Yeah. Yep. I appreciate that.
I paraphrase it, but it's
No, that's good. I like it. It's the New Living Translation version. That was good. Maybe the NIV version. No.
that's it.
I was gonna say, how many times do we appreciate humble people? Especially, we see somebody in a public figure who has a sense of authority or power, and they're humble, and, I mean, we gravitate to that person.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, how many of you have had, how many of us have worked for arrogant bosses? How many of us want to go the extra mile for an arrogant boss? All of a sudden you get a humble boss, somebody that's personable, somebody that can empathize with you, and you want to do everything for that person. I mean, that's a reason to emulate Jesus' character right there, because it causes people to want a relationship with you. Anybody else? Yeah, here.
Correlating with God's people must be different. God showed us that He was different in that when men abandoned Him and rejected Him and chose kings, He actually put in place Samuel. He put in place Elijah. He put in place, instead of abandoning them, He put stronger leaders there, knowing what was going on.
Well, it's like we talked about in Judges. They get taken over by the enemy. And so what does God do? He hears their cries and He raises up a judge. He gives them salvation. I mean, that process repeats itself over and over. I mean, it repeats itself over and over from the beginning of the world. It seems like we mess up and God saves us. I mean, we see it all the time. Ultimately with Jesus Christ. Yeah. Anybody else? All right. So God's people are to be different. Israel is in this great opportunity to be different, to be a thriving nation that doesn't even have a king. And we imagine how much glory that could have brought to God's name. But instead, what do they say? Deuteronomy 17, verse 14 talks about it. Give us a king like all the other nations. Moses said, this is what you're going to say. And 1 Samuel chapter 8, we read about that. Let's go over to 1 Samuel chapter 8 and just read about that. Because this is when we see the monarchy is established here. In 1 Samuel chapter 8. I don't know how it works here. Do people from the pews read sometimes? Or should I maybe I'll just read from us. Yeah? No? Brian, what'd you say?
Yeah, just call somebody.
Alright, cool. Brian, I'm going to call on you then.
Okay.
You got yourself into this mess. You got yourself out of it.
All right.
1 Samuel chapter 8. Why don't you read verses 1 through 9?
1 through 9.
Yeah.
1 Samuel chapter 8, 1 through 9.
Mm-hmm.
Now it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of the firstborn was Joel, and the name of the second Abijah, and they were judges in Beersheba. And his sons did not walk in his ways, and they turned aside after dishonest gain, and took bribes and perverted justice. And then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and said to him, Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make for us a king to judge us like all other nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. So Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, Heed the voice of the people in all they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. Now therefore heed their voice. However, you shall solemnly forewarn them and show them the anger of the king who will reign over them.
Alright, so there you have it. This is how it starts. Eventually, who becomes the first king after this? Who's anointed as the first king?
Saul.
It's Saul, yeah. And so we get there. You can go through this period of judges. Samuel, I guess his sons count as judges. They're the last judges. His sons aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. People complain about it, and they say, Give us a king. Obviously, this thing was displeasing to Samuel. And Samuel God gives him that assurance and says, Look, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. Give them what they're asking for. What's interesting in verse 9? What do you notice about verse 9? What does he tell Samuel to do?
To show them the behavior of the king.
Yes, show them the behavior of the king. But what does he say before that, too?
To solemnly forewarn them.
What they want. To solemnly warn. That's what I'm looking for. Solemnly warn them. Because this wasn't God's ideal plan. And they're gonna get themselves kind of into a mess by establishing a monarchy. It's just gonna go downhill from there. And so God says, okay, I'll give you what you want. Moses said, Moses already said this was going to happen. But I'm gonna warn you guys of what's going to happen if this is the route you choose to go. Yeah, Clint.
Solomon roughed them up to such a point, when he died, and he didn't do what God wanted him to do, that caused a division, the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes, and the other ones, and they got what exactly was prophesied would happen.
Yeah, well, and then it was Solomon. He was, enforcing hard labor. All the things he was doing required hard labor. And then his son is a king after him, and he decides to make people work even harder. People revolt. This causes a divided kingdom, right? Yeah. So God's people divide. That's never good.
I find it interesting, Sam, in that passage there in Samuel's, God even gives them, or Samuel, or God and Samuel, give them a chance to back out, because he starts listing, a king's going to take your sons, a king's going to take your daughters, a king's going to take your fields, a king's going to take your men servants, a king's going to take a tenth of everything you make. And then even after telling them all the things this king's going to take, they repeat, oh yeah, we still want a king.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that. But
Okay.
what I want us to first understand, because we're running out of time here. 10:15, right? Yeah. Okay, I got a cheesy throne. I'm really proud of this animation. Are you guys ready? Yeah, worked hard on this. But here's the throne, right? This is God's throne. And what we have to understand is with Saul, what happens here is you got God's throne, and for the very first time, it's coming down to earth. Okay? And with Jesus, the whole point of Jesus is to bring that throne back up to heaven.
Amen.
Sitting at the right hand of God where it's going to be forever. Okay? So I just want us to understand that. Okay, and so as you're talking about, we go on and we read that warning, and he says, these will be the ways of the king. Notice it says that these will be the ways. This is going to happen. It's not, this might happen, this will happen. This will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war, and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, and cooks, and bakers. He will take the best of your fields, and vineyards, and olive orchards, and give them to his servants. Goes on to say, he will take the tenth of your grain, and your vineyards, and give it to his officers, and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants, and the best of your young men and your donkeys, and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out, because your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. There's the warning that Brian was talking about, and that goes back to what we were saying earlier, that before you have a nation, and yeah, you have leadership in place, with the priesthood, and obviously in the days of Moses, but it was all designed to serve God. Everybody was serving God, and now we see that change with the king. It's not just serving God anymore, but it's also serving the king. And so we see their sons would be taken, right? Look at how many times that word, I think I counted it, I don't even have it on here all the time. I think it's like 6 times that it says that he's going to take something. All of a sudden the king, it becomes take, right? Their sons would be taken and used for war. Their daughters would be taken. The best of their fields and vineyards would be taken. Harvests and flocks would be taxed. Servants, young men, and donkeys would be taken. And then they would be slaves. And they're going to cry out to God, and God isn't going to hear them that day. And so basically what we see here is another example of a pattern we see all throughout the Bible, starting in the garden. We go from perfection to rapid regression when things are left to man. This is just what happens. When monarchy is introduced in Israel, we see regression in quality of life for the commoners. Obviously, they're giving all these things to their sons and daughters are being taken, right? Hard labor. Service towards God. We see that regression because we eventually see idolatry is introduced in the nation of Israel. And not only that, they're having to split their service between God and the king. Morality. Again, we see that with idolatry. We see rapid regression in morality. That's what we see whenever we choose our ways over God's. And we see a regression in unity with the divided kingdom. And so what should we expect today when we make a departure from God's plan for us? I mean, that's the pattern. We talk about, we study history so we can learn from history, and those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. This is the type of things that we need to be paying attention to. When we choose our plans over God's plans, I think that we see quality of life, regression in quality of life, because our life is less fulfilling without God. When you choose God, your life may not be perfect. I don't believe in a health and wealth gospel, but I do believe in a fulfilling life. Something that's meaningful, something where you always have a hope and something to look forward to. We choose our plan over God's. Obviously, service towards God we're going to see regression there because we're too focused on serving ourselves, right? Morality. We're going to see a regression in morality. That's not to say people who don't believe in God don't have any morals, but you see a regression in it because God is not only this one true source of objective morality, but He's also the one source of accountability, a true accountability, eternal accountability. When you lose that kind of accountability, people are just not going to care as much about doing what's right and wrong. And finally, unity. When we choose our plan over God's plan, what happens? What happens in the church? What do we often split over in the church? Opinions, right? Opinions. We don't argue over the things that are explicitly stated. We argue over opinions, and we divide. When we choose our plans over God's plans, we see a regression in unity. That's all I have for you this morning. Any more comments or questions? No? Oh, Gary?
Just to go back to what you had on the board with that unity and stuff. It's like David was their greatest king they ever had.
Yeah.
And he did exactly everything that they did, that God told him he was going to do. And even just the one example of Bathsheba, he kills one of his most loyal subjects. He takes his wife. He takes whatever else. All the property, everything else.
Yeah, appreciate that. You're right. All right. So that was a little bit of history, but also a little bit of application there. Appreciate you guys' time.